Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday weekly rankings with Jim Coventry. We're going to be going quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, talking about our favorite guys, at least among the other experts out there. Jim does this on a weekly basis. It feels like an hourly basis, going through all the different start-sit options, but also more importantly, this player or that player. So we're going to be identifying a few of them and talk about position by position as we go through the show. Again, welcome everyone to the Wednesday weekly rankings with Jim Coventry, myself. Starting out at quarterback right away, I want to get right into it, Jim. We had saw the rookie debuts for Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, and Jaden Daniels. The rushing aspect certainly helped Jaden Daniels become the better fantasy asset. Caleb Williams, I don't know who looked worse, Bo Nix or Caleb Williams. I don't know if that's a ranking question, but either one of them didn't look fantastic. So from a rushing floor, Jaden Daniels, I think, has to be a top 10 quarterback moving forward. But where do you have him ranked this week?
Yeah, it's going to be impossible, and Jaden Daniels is healthy, not to rank him as a top 10 quarterback. I say this every year, and every year it gets older and older, and the younger people may not get it. Tim Tebow was a QB1 when he was playing, and he could not throw at an NFL level. So there's that. And when we saw last week Jaden Daniels, most of his passing, like he completes 17 out of 24 passes, 184 yards. The majority of that was to Eckler and Brian Robinson. They had over 100 of the 184 yards. Zach Ertz was next to 28 yards. The receivers were a complete non-factor. Terry McLaurin, 17 yards. He was outdone by Luke McCaffrey, 18. But like you said, Joe, what ended up happening was it was the running. It was 2 second-half touchdowns. It was garbage time. But there's going to be a lot of garbage time for this team. So that's what's going to happen. So as long as Jaden Daniels is healthy, you have to put him near the top.
Well, that's where I was going to go with my next question is there garbage time against one of the garbage teams? I'm making up a word now, Jim, from week one in the Giants, who looked downright awful. Daniel Jones might not be a starter into week 3 at this point. And all the HBO highlights got played ad nauseum between the Saquon Barkley takes and the Daniel Jones takes on repeat in a bad way for Shane, the GM for the Giants. I think the answer is it doesn't really matter. Again, Jaden Daniels and his rushing floor make him a top 10 play. But is there the possibility that the Commanders might actually get to take their foot off the pedal, given how bad the Giants are, and therefore Daniels isn't as used? I mean, we're talking about 18, 16 carries, whatever it was. That can't possibly happen in week 2 with how bad this Giants team is.
It's a very fair question to ask. Going into week 1, I was outlining how the Giants were in a big state of trouble against Minnesota because you knew Brian Flores would blitz, and even if it didn't get there, the perceived pressure was going to fold Daniel Jones like a house of cards. He was never going to be able to play when there was perceived pressure. And all that said, that was a bad matchup for them. Washington has no pass rush. Last year, they traded away Montez Sweat. They traded away Chase Young. Their tackles are real nice, but that's not really helping a lot. And the interior line, they actually upgraded a bit. So I think this is actually a game where the Giants can do a little bit of damage on defense. Remember, the Commanders can't cover either. So I think the Giants are in really good shape here. I think they're able to score points, and I think Jaden Daniels has to keep up. So although it sounds counterintuitive, I really do think they're going to have to score some points here.
Interesting. You have Jaden Daniels listed as quarterback 8 on your rankings this week. Right above him, Dak Prescott, one of the bigger winners, I think, of the overall week 1, if not because he was literally the highest paid player now of all time, certainly at the quarterback position, but also that they throttled the Browns defense, which was certainly vaunted last year. I think a lot of people had expectations that it'd be similarly this year, didn't do so, at least in week 1. Vibes has been the word of choice for a lot of different teams over week 1, and I think we could say that week 2, the vibes are really, really, really bad in Cleveland right now. Maybe that's why Dak Prescott looked as good as he did. But Saints were one of the bigger winners as well with the Panthers, another team that vibes certainly not very good. So is Dak set for success, I think, in week 2 against the Saints defense, who did look good against Bryce Young?
You know, I have to really give Mike McCarthy credit again, and I've been always hesitant to do that. Last year, after the week 6 bye, he realized we can't run the ball, so we're just going to throw the heck out of it. And they did, and Dak was great. And this year, they come into the season, they play Cleveland. That was a horrific matchup. A new left tackle, a new center. Terrence Steele, the right tackle, he's terrible in pass pro. Dak Prescott shreds them. How? McCarthy got the ball out quick. He's showing an understanding of how to make an offense work. It's been a half a year last year or more, and it's the first week. This matchup is so much better. The Saints don't have a type of pass rush they've had in the past. And their corners, Lattimore is dealing with a hamstring, but the two outside corners, Lattimore and Adebo, they're physical guys. They want to get their hands on you. They want to hand fight you. Well, CD Lamb, we've seen it since last year, and he's a week further from back in camp and healthier in terms of, not that he was injured, but healthier in terms of full capacity to play.
Mm-hmm.
They move him all over. But even if he faces Lattimore or Debo, it's a styles make fights. They're going to try to get their hands on him, and Lamb's going to be 2 yards past him already going inside. He doesn't play physical, and he doesn't have to. And so I think that it's going to be wheels up for that duo. Jake Ferguson may not play this week. I'm not worried. I think that New Orleans is really going to get exposed. They're playing at Dallas. Dallas is so much better at home always.
Yeah, I'm afraid of the stinker that we had last year. It wasn't week 2, but there was like a week 3 or week 4 home against the Cardinals, or maybe they traveled to the Cardinals, and they were like double-digit favorites. That was the one that burst survivor bubbles last season. Mike McCarthy's teams are always due for one of those. I don't know if it's week 2, and I don't know if it's against the Saints team, who I'm let's just say I do not believe that what we saw in week 1 will carry over to 30 other NFL franchises. The Panthers are not an NFL franchise. I don't know what they are. They're probably slightly above college level. I know we make that joke all the time, but that is a putrid team right now. You can go watch the Panthers for $2 if you want. Right now, tickets are available for the Panthers home games, at least at $2 at the moment. I'm not joking. That was on Twitter somewhere where it's that cheap. Now, maybe it's nosebleed spots, but that's brutal. Along the quarterback lines, brutal wise, I mean, I don't say what you want about the Bengals. Jamar Chase was sick. Maybe he wasn't. T. Higgins didn't play. Joe Burrow couldn't lift up a Gatorade bottle on the sideline. That was really uneasy if you have a lot of fantasy shares of Joe Burrow. You have him at quarterback 13. I think that's actually generous going into this Chiefs defense this week.
I do need to move Baker Mayfield ahead of him. I need to make that adjustment for sure. There's a lot of other quarterbacks beneath them that are either in bad spots or not playing well. And it's one of those, they're playing the Chiefs. And you have to think that if they're going to get up for a game, they've had great success against the Chiefs in the past.
Sure.
And Chase is another weekend now. Hopefully, whatever is up with him, he's fine to go. And, he's not happy. We know that. But I think the Chiefs are going to bring out the potential best, and especially Burrow and Chase. And I think they're going to make it. L'Jarius Sneed's gone. He was in Tennessee now. And I think that one's important because the other corners are very good, but they're not L'Jarius Sneed good. And Jamar Chase gets extra opportunity and potential. It is a generous ranking at quarterback 13. I specifically made sure he was out of the top 12 because how many quarterbacks are in a typical league? 12. So I made sure I moved him out. But yes, I do think that I'm going to move Baker Mayfield ahead of him the more I think about that and move him to 14. But again, a lot of sketchy quarterbacks beneath him right now.
Right below Burrow, you mentioned Tua going against the Bills. This is a home game. Short week of rest, obviously, but home for the Dolphins against that Bills team, which I didn't think looked all that good against the Cardinals. That wasn't surprising to me. Offensively, Josh Allen carried things. I don't know if he does that the whole season long. Below Burrow again for Justin Fields. I mean, against the Broncos, that rushing aspect, I wouldn't blame anyone if they wanted to play Fields over Burrow. I'd imagine you're the same way. Herbert, Cousins, Caleb Williams, Rodgers, all those guys to some extent looked miserable in week 1. Rodgers is probably the lone upside scenario if that's the case against that Titans okay defense. I don't know if that was Caleb Williams or the Titans defense, whatever that week 1 game was awful on both sides. And then there's Trevor Lawrence, who's all the way down at 21 for you, maybe rightfully so, going against this Browns defense again, which I mentioned earlier was supposed to be good. They were good at times last year. Dak Prescott carved them up. Do you think Trevor Lawrence does that this time around?
Yeah, so with Trevor Lawrence, look, the Browns did not show up on defense last week, and it was really McCarthy getting it out quick, but that shouldn't have been enough. It should have been a major problem. I can't explain why they didn't show up defensively. The talent is indisputable. They're coming back this week. Even though Cleveland's on the road, they're going to be angry. Jim Schwartz is going to make sure the pressure is dialed up. I don't think the Jacksonville line has a real chance of holding up Delvin Tomlinson on the inside to go at Zadarius Smith and, of course, Myles Garrett on the outside. I have to think they are going to put some enormous pressure, especially coming off an embarrassing, and it was an embarrassing loss to Dallas. This defense is for real. They have 3 corners that can cover, and they can cover while that rush is getting there. And with the lack of creativity in the Jacksonville offense, I just don't see it happening. And last week, Trevor Lawrence, 12 of 21, 162 and a touchdown, and they're playing Miami. Miami had a lot of turnover on that defense. Jalen Ramsey wasn't healthy. That was a stat line similar to what we've been seeing from Lawrence since last year. The yards were a little higher, but the one touchdown is pretty normal. Right now, it's going to be very hard to predict Trevor Lawrence to throw more than one touchdown in many games because that's who he was last year. And through week one, nothing's changed. And Joe, real quick word, you brought up Caleb Williams. I think it's important to spend a moment on him. He ran into an unfortunate circumstance. I thought that Tennessee, Denard Wilson's their defensive coordinator. He coached with Mike McDonald in Baltimore. And we talk about those simulated pressures. What does that mean? That means that it's the offensive team does not know where the pressure is coming from. They're pre-programmed in practice to know who's going, but they don't put extra bodies. It's something that's done through the coaching. And so defenses can confuse these offenses. Caleb Williams in his first NFL game was not prepared because you could see it. There were Tennessee defenders in the backfield anytime he dropped back. And it was because they read the Bears like an open book test. And that said, we're not going to see many teams running that level of pressure. And Williams will get more experience the more he sees it. And so he'll do better against it. I still have him low this week, but I think that game was specifically bad for that reason.
Yeah, I'm not overreacting to Caleb Williams' performance. Would I play him in my lineup week 2? Absolutely not. I think you have to run through. That was going to be the best chance to play Caleb Williams week 1. Maybe that the Bears had some sort of offensive keys where they could have game planned not for that situation, but to throw a reverse, right? To throw things that Tennessee Titans might not have been prepared for. That clearly wasn't the case. I don't know if that's Shane Waldron. I don't know if that's just the lack of chemistry with the Adunze and Keenan Allen aspect of things, but it wasn't good week 1. And I would say Caleb Williams could be a fantasy starter for you in late October, November. I mean, that's totally realistic and the timeline that you'd expect for a rookie, no matter how generational, at least mentioned, Caleb Williams was entering the draft. So totally with you on that one. And I'm not fading Caleb Williams rest of season. It was a bad week 1, might be bad week 2, but let's see what happens as he progresses throughout his career and throughout this year. Reminder that we do have gambling coverage and every sort of fantasy aspect covered for you at RotoWire. Check out our fantasy rankings, our content and articles. I'll have my gambling article. I was 9-5-2 against the spread last week, Jim, up there on RotoWire later today, rotowire.com, like you see in the banner here below. 2-day trial access, no credit card needed. Check that out. And again, if you're into fantasy baseball, rounding out your playoffs or end of season stuff, hopefully my Brewers actually look good for the last 3 or 4 weeks of the year. rotowire.com/try, 48-hour access to site, no credit card needed. Let's move over to those running backs, Jim. And I think the biggest winner position-wise had to be J.K. Dobbins, at least among the running backs. I was certain he was going to be the rushing leader for the Chargers post week 1. But I did not see a 46-yard run. I did not see a 61-yard run. And frankly, both that came in the second half. The Chargers only had 2 first downs the entire first half. The ground and pound offense finally won out over that Raiders defense in the second half. And I would imagine that plays out similarly against this Panthers pathetic defense.
You know, the biggest story here, and not many people are going to talk about it because they're the Panthers, but Derek Brown was their only blue chip player on the team, in my opinion. Defensive end, great run stopper. He's out for the season. Wow. Messed up his knee. That was a massive. So now a bad defense potentially becomes even worse. I mean, Shaq Thompson's a good defender at linebacker, but it's one guy. So what? And so, yes, the Chargers are going to come in and they're going to be able to move the ball very easily. Nobody has to double team Derek Brown, and that just allows the offensive line to do a little better work here. So, yes, wheels up. And I think that people who are saying, oh, well, they're the Raiders, everybody runs on the Raiders. Well, A, that's not true. But B, Gus Edwards went 11 for 26. And so it's not like Gus Edwards ran all over him. It was barely 2.5 yards a carry. So that said, J.K. Dobbins showed up. You have to think. I mean, I remember James Robinson came back from his Achilles, and in his first game, he had a big run. I think it was against the Chargers. Of course, imagine that.
Right.
A big run against the Chargers. Right. But I don't think this is a fluke for Dobbins. Dobbins, the good news was it was a week 1 Achilles last year, so full calendar year to heal up. The news in camp was good enough on him, and he played 58% of the snaps. So, yeah, I think this is a great spot to keep rolling with him. We're not going to be completely confident because we know the injury history, but he's healthy right now. And that said, it was only 10 carries, which actually Gus Edwards had 1 more carry, but I think you'd have to assume the team's going to lean a little more on Dobbins after that performance.
And he was the team's pass catcher out of the backfield too. Gus Edwards only had one catch. They had kept Jarrett Patterson on the roster to be that guy. I was a little bit worried maybe there's going to be a 3-headed nasty for fantasy backfield, and Dobbins was that guy. So against this Panthers defense, top 23, top 24. I mean, like, he's a running back too, I think, for most people, right?
Yeah, he's in that running back 2 category. The lack of usage, the big yardage. I mean, you're not going to get a 60 to 40-yard run every week, just kind of the way it is. So we've got to see those carries get in the 15 range, or maybe even a little higher before we can comfortably move Dobbins higher in the rankings. But yeah, as a firm running back 2 right now, there's no reason to shy away from him.
And we don't know the red zone part of things. The Chargers offense didn't get there very much. They had Ladd McConkey touchdown at the very end when the Raiders were completely selling out against the run. Dobbins scored from 12 yards out. It was a really good run. But like, if it's in the 5-yard line, typically Greg Roman, Gus Edwards, that's a Gus Edwards role. We haven't seen that. We might not see that all that often because I'm not sure this offense will be able to function that way against normal teams. Raiders and Panthers excluded from that equation. The big news of this morning, and I think probably leading up until tomorrow, was a question that Jelly had actually asked. Raheem Mostert is out. He's already been ruled out for Thursday's game against the Dolphins. Devon Achane listed as a game-time decision. No surprise there, given the 185-pound Devon Achane getting injured. I've been talking about that now for, it feels like 6 months. Yes, he performed well. Gets injured. That's going to happen, I think, frequently. So with that being said, Mostert out, Achane game time decision. You'd imagine Jalen Wright will at least be active for week 2. Is it Jalen Wright? Is it Jeff Wilson? How do you sort through this Dolphins backfield?
You know, it's tough. And I want to point out, first of all, the Dolphins played the Jaguars, who are a good defense, but they're not lights out against the run. And yet Mostert and Achane on the ground, 16 carries for 33 yards. That's a tick over 2 yards per carry. This is an offense that normally has a great ability to run the football. And that didn't happen here. So now I'm a little concerned about the running game, that maybe in each of the first 2 years, Mike McDaniel's come up with some great ideas and the team has looked insane early in the season. They didn't look insane last week. It was Tyreek Hill making a big play, Jalen Waddle making a big play. They should have lost that game, but they had a couple of superstars who bailed them out, and Travis Etienne handed the ball over on a fumble near the goal line. All that said, who are we counting on at running back? Well, like I said, if Achane is injured and it's Thursday, like you're saying, well, probably not getting a full workload here. Mm-hmm. And Jeff Wilson, it seemed like any time he had a chance last year, they pulled the rug on him. So as to how the usage is going to shake out, Jalen Wright, like you said, he should be involved. It's really hard to trust them. Maybe they come into this short week game plan saying, you know what, it's a bunch of short passes. Maybe we get Jonnu Smith a little more involved. Certainly Hill's going to get his targets. Maybe they're not even going to mess a whole lot with the running game. And I think it's going to be very dangerous starting at him. If you have to, it's fine. If Achane's active, lower expectations, but because he caught 7 passes last week, maybe he's used more as a receiver than a runner. So I think you got to start him if you have him.
Interesting. And along the same lines, and this is another play that was a little bit rising up your board, in a 14-team league, somebody was asking, this is half-point PPR, which matters. Assumption is no Christian McCaffrey. That seemed to be clear from Adam Schefter Monday of this week. And the news that may or may not have been new, at least for Kyle Shanahan to cover their ass, with the lack of start for Jordan Mason or aforementioned start for Friday. No Christian McCaffrey, it seems like. So Jeff Wilson or Justice Hill, again, in the half-point PPR league.
You know, again, Justice Hill played over half of the snaps, and there was a lot of game script stuff going on. I mean, because the Ravens came out and put 2 pass-catching tight ends on the field, and they had 3 new offensive linemen, and they didn't use Patrick Ricard to block more than 20% of the snaps or so. That means that the Chiefs kind of figured them out, and they forced Lamar Jackson to dump the ball to Justice Hill, to dump the ball to Likely. They gave him that underneath stuff all day long. Well, the Raiders, I don't know they're coming in with that. A, they don't have that level of defense the Chiefs have. B, I don't think they're going to be able to manipulate them the same way. I really think Derrick Henry gets going on the ground here. I don't see it being a big Justice Hill game, but he is going to get snaps. He is going to get targets. Even if it's 3 catches for 30 yards, that might be enough to do more than Jeff Wilson. So I'm probably going with Justice Hill here.
Over Jeff Wilson in half-point PPR. Interesting.
Yes.
That's yeah. So I had made the case, I think it was on a Friday video, but we were tasked with doing overreactions from the Thursday night game. So we're all trying to capitalize on those views, following the Chiefs-Ravens game. It's fantastic. And I was trying to say, don't overreact to Justice Hill. There's no way that Todd Monken uses that sort of scheme again, where it's Justice Hill getting 47 snaps. It was crazy. And every one of those were passing opportunities. He got 1 carry for 3 yards in all that playing time. There is not a offensive coordinator in the entire league that would be that stupid to do that the entire season long. Why? It's not that we're doing baseball sabermetrics per se, but when you see a player who automatically has that sort of run pass split that's on the field, you're giving a tell to the defense. So even if Justice Hill is out there 50-50 split, which I agree with you, I don't think that will happen, the Ravens will likely run the ball more with him, if only to throw off those splits that they did in week 1. And that was because the Ravens were trailing the whole game. Like I get why it happened, but you're not assuming that's going to happen the entire season. Or Todd Monken is one of the biggest idiots of all time. And I don't think he's that. So I'm assuming Justice Hill gets a few more carries, a few less pass catching opportunities, even if that split stays the same playing time wise for Derrick Henry.
One last thing.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And one last thing. Max Crosby's going to be bringing some heat.
Yep.
And when he brings heat, if it's a third down, it's going to be very easy. Lamar's going to run or he's going to check it off to Hill, because on third downs, Hill will be in the game. And so that pressure will necessitate. I do think he gets three catches in this game. And I think probably he gets some yardage. But like I said, Jeff Wilson is just so hard to count on, because we saw it last year. There were games he should have played and they didn't go to him. So he had 5 carries last week. I get that. But man, if Jalen Wright's there and if Achane does suit up, man, we might get 2 carries out of Jeff Wilson. At least I know Hill has a role. And this is John Harbaugh has this love affair with Justice Hill. I don't understand it. Last year I was like flabbergasted.
Right.
How is he on the field? They have other options, and they're like, John Harbaugh loves him. That's the end of story.
Right? Real quick, because it's pertinent to what we were discussing here. Somebody had dropped Jordan Mason to get J.K. Dobbins. I understand the concept for that. Dobbins likely the starter all year round. Jordan Mason, you'd assume, provide Christian McCaffrey is eventually healthy, becomes an afterthought, or at least one of those quality backups like Alexander Madison was, Delvin Cook during the Viking years. Is this a scenario where you're trying to then go ahead and pick up Jordan Mason, wasting whatever waiver wire high priority claim you could have? Like I think you're playing Jordan Mason every single week that Christian McCaffrey's out. But the question is, how valuable does he need to be from a waiver wire perspective?
We draft running backs frequently that are just backups in the hopes that they'll pop. Now, if you're in a shallow league, 10-team league, you probably don't have the roster depth to carry a guy who's a backup. You probably have enough players to count on. But if you're in a 12-team league with a decent-sized bench, there are players on that roster that you're not going to use every week, but you know the value of a player if he gets into a starting role. If McCaffrey comes back soon, there's no guarantee he doesn't aggravate that calf again. Remember, he injured a calf in the 2022 NFC Championship game, so it's not like it's his first calf injury ever. Of course, that was the last game of the year, so he didn't miss time, but probably would have. So all that said, there's high value if McCaffrey misses time, knowing you have an RB1 instantly on your hands. It's just a matter if you have him now, can you hold Jordan Mason through the bye weeks? That gets to be the problem. You hit the bye weeks, and then you got to get people in. And if McCaffrey has been playing, then you run that issue. But otherwise, yeah, you treat him like any other high-end backup. The sky's the limit.
Well, and I think it's not that it's conducive to it, but you think about the games played that McCaffrey's had relative to any other running back over the past 3 years, given the 49ers postseason success. I mean, that stuff adds up for the way the Niners use him, the way McCaffrey has been so involved in that offense, in the additional games played as well from the postseason perspective. Again, not that that's assumption or that you guarantee he will be injured, but he is more at risk to be injured, like we saw end of last season, now beginning of this year, than most other running backs in that scenario. So I think Jordan Mason should be rostered in a lot of places. We're not like breaking new ground with that sort of assumption. Like obviously that we know Jordan Mason, given especially what he did against the Jets defense week 1, you want to have him out there. The J.K. Dobbins picking him up over Mason makes sense to me. But Mason needs to be rostered in most formats, I think, right now and moving forward. So real quick, 2 other running back questions for you. You have Zamir White listed as 26 among running backs. So just outside running back 2 range, but close enough where I'd imagine most people who have him probably are playing him. You're going against the Ravens defense, and it's not the Chiefs offense like week 1 where they can pass and therefore open things up for Pacheco. And I don't think Zamir White is anywhere near Pacheco's level of a running back. So 26 seems high to me. Why do you have Zamir White at least in that range?
It's tough. It's more about the players behind him. Again, I'm seeing like DeAndre Swift, It's terrible. He can't see past the first level. Last week, he did very little, 10 for 30. He just didn't look good. And I'm not excited about his prospect in the Bears offense. Zach Moss had 9 carries. He got it in the end zone, but that's not enough. So it's all these players with all these questions. Zamir White, look, he played 38% of the snaps. That was not positive. He did get 13 carries and 2 targets, didn't do much with them, but that said, he's going to get the crack at it. And Baltimore, if one thing, I see them as being much better against the pass than they are against the run. Even like Patrick Queen being gone, when he was with Roquan, the duo together, because this Queen's speed was unleashed. If a run went to the outside, Roquan's kind of by himself now. He doesn't really have that level of support. So I think that if the Raiders can commit to the running game, and if they can keep it moderately close, look, I'm not looking for a big game at all from White. Purposely got him outside of running back 2 range, but I do think you could get 50 yards, and 50 yards is 50 yards. It's not a great game, but it could be enough to get you a low end running back 2. Best used as a flex, though.
Okay, that's fair. Real quick, we've been getting a lot of start-sit questions in the chat. Love you guys participating. I always like to interact with that when it makes sense and we're pertinent to the conversation. But Jim, you do start-sit questions every day on your Twitter, right? At Jim Coventry NFL. It feels like every other hour you have a show related to that start-sit stuff. So while it's the Thursday games, I understand because we're trying to react to that. But normally, when can people ask you the start-sit questions?
Yeah, the best time, Sunday mornings, 11 a.m. Eastern, on right where you're watching right now. If you're watching, especially if you're on Fantasy Football YouTube channel, that's the place. And what happens is we got 2 hours. We have all the news in. Every last update, every last injury is accounted for. You can ask me the questions earlier, but there are a lot of players who are questionable on defense or offensive line, and all those factors go in. So I will give you the why. We'll get everybody. You'll have to probably wait a little bit, but it's worth it if you want your question answered. But yeah, catch me 11 a.m. every Sunday on where you're watching right now.
Yeah, we have a ton of content on the RotoWire YouTube channel for NFL. A lot of the stuff going live. We have live podcasts also being done simultaneously. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, RotoWire Fantasy Football, we have daily podcasts at this point. But any of the videos you're watching, please throw the like button. It'd be great for us. If you want to subscribe to, we'd love that as well. But any of that stuff right below here for the RotoWire YouTube stuff. Loving all the interactions we're getting. I just want to make sure that Sunday, Jim's got you covered with all the start-sit questions, provided we're not doing the Dolphins-Bills ones. I understand that for Thursday and trying to get those in there. So let's move over to the receiver spot. And there was maybe 3 quarterbacks overall that threw for more than 200 yards. It felt very clear, if we haven't seen that in years past, that week 1 is really preseason week 4, if not week 3 for some teams. It was brutal from a passing perspective. So as a result, those receivers in the ADP 14 through 16 range, Marvin Harrison, Drake London, Chris Olave, all looked downright awful. And I was taking Drake London everywhere. If you were unfortunate enough to have pick 11 or 12, like I did often, I was taking Drake London a lot. If you took Marvin Harrison, no one would have blamed you. And every one of those spots, I think, failed you. So what's your expectation for, let's say Drake London first, but really that receiver tier of Olave, Marvin Harrison, and London moving forward?
The Atlanta Falcons, it was obviously a horrible week 1 for the passing game. The leading receiver, Ray McLeod, and it wasn't close. McLeod had 7 targets, 4 for 52. He's their slot guy, though. Why was the slot guy effective? Well, you had TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith of the Steelers just wrecking the offense. And the other thing was Kirk Cousins is best when he's under center and using play action. And that also would have slowed down the pass rush. But they had him what we call pistol. So he's in a modified shotgun with Bijan Robinson on his side. Well, the problem there was defenses come in playing pass on that. And so Highsmith and Watt just pin your ears back and get after him. And it was a problem. And Kirk Cousins was under duress all day long. So hopefully, first of all, Zach Robinson, the new coach who comes from the Sean McVay tree, figures out some things like going to some play action. But this week's matchup isn't as bad. You don't have Highsmith and TJ Watt. The Eagles have a reputation of being a great pass rush team, but they're not that team they were 2 years ago. This is not a dominant pass rush team. And the Falcons line is good enough to handle normal pass rushes. So I think even if they go back to the same thing, there will be time. And I do not put a lot of stock into the corners of the Eagles. You got Kelly Ringo, second-year guy. You got the rookies playing, they're switching in. Not really worried. Darius Slay's in there, but Slay's is smaller. He's seen his best days. I think that we see Drake London come roaring back in this one.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles secondary, I don't know if it was the Brazilian ice skating rink that they are playing on,
Yes.
or they are just as bad as they were last year. They invested a lot of resources to make that position or that secondary group better. I think they will develop over time.
Yes.
I'm most concerned because I have a lot of Kirk Cousins, but also, again, a lot of Drake London. There was absolutely zero movement from Kirk Cousins in the pocket and no designed movement either. Didn't he take every one or all but one of the snaps in shotgun? And I don't know if that's an Achilles thing or what. I've never injured that part of my body. And I don't want to just assume an NFL player would react the same way I would if I did injure it. But that was a little jarring to me. Like, oh, okay. So the guy that can't really move anyway had an injury that saps his mobility. We're going to literally have him stand in the same spot every single time we're dropping back or passing or anything. Like that's a concerning strategy, I would imagine, especially against this Eagles pass rush.
I think what happened was Zach Robinson. This is some of what Sean McVay's been doing. Sean McVay with Matthew Stafford has been doing more of that. And I think he brought that with, not understanding Kirk Cousins is not Matthew Stafford. They're both veteran quarterbacks. They're both very good. But Stafford does some things at an elite level, like the read, the pre-snap read. Like Stafford is light years ahead of most quarterbacks. And I think that Zach Robinson didn't understand Kirk Cousins is going to be more sensitive to pressure. Matthew Stafford, he's a bad dude. He will stand there and just till the last second and hold the ball. Kirk Cousins doesn't want to get hit like that. You could tell by the way he played. So there's a big difference. So I have to hope that Zach Robinson makes some adjustments. Like I said earlier, this week's matchup, I don't think the pressure is near the level he saw. So Cousins can exist in that, pistol formation, shotgun. But if they're going to face another really, really good defense, they have to fix that with more play action.
It was one of the points I mentioned on an earlier show. We were doing the pre-podcast stuff, and with no waiver wire, things like I do every Tuesday with Jake Latarski, we were picking over-unders for every team. And there was a bet for the Falcons to win the division. And I said, you could do that. Like, it totally makes sense. Do it after week 2 when they play the Steelers, and the Eagles. The pass rush for those two teams, really how good those two teams are. The Falcons face 2 good teams the rest of the way. So the Falcons can lose this one on Monday night. They can get clobbered again. We can overreact once more. But I think I would like to capitalize on getting lower shares of Drake London or lower optimism if that's the case. And I know this is a weekly ranking show, Jim, but for my personal interest, how are you ranking rest of season Drake London, Olave, and Marvin Harrison? Again, 3 receivers all around that same tier that did not perform to what we're expecting.
So Chris Olave, I just don't think they needed him. I mean, if you went to take the garbage out and you were watching that game in the first quarter, the game was over when you came back from taking the garbage out. So they didn't have to go to him. And I think that's really all it was. Olave was heavily targeted last year. I know it's a new coaching staff with Clint Kubiak now, but really that offense is predicated on an alpha receiver off of play action. But I think the coaching staff realized when they got that lead right away, let's get people comfortable. Let's get other people involved so that we could build confidence. I really think that's all they did. We don't need Olave here. So Olave is going to get his 8 targets in a lot of games plus. That's going to happen commonly. And I know the offensive line's a disaster in New Orleans, but again, the play action, and we saw it used. That play action is going to help. Kirk Cousins could have used a little dose of that. But it's going to help Derek Carr. When Derek Carr, it was a super small sample size last year, but when he was in play action, Derek Carr was the number 1 rated passer in the NFL. I believe that. I know it sounds stupid, but he was. Again, it was like 26 attempts, but it was still, Derek Carr can do that. So I'm fine on Olave. He's going to be where I drafted him. Like, he's still like a top 12-ish type receiver. Marvin Harrison, I don't know what to do with it. See, the thing is, everybody thought Buffalo, they lost all these players in free agency and the team was gutted. They still have 3 good corners. And they were Sean McDermott's a great coach too, defensively. I just think that the Cardinals offense wasn't ready for them. And they got that big lead early. That's the other thing. They were conservative. They had a big lead. And I think they took their foot off the gas. And because that happens, like that subliminal switch, I call it. You get the big lead. You know they're competitive. You know you got to hang in, but you don't. I think it was a weird game. Harrison is going to get you 1,000 yards, but where you drafted him, you need 1,200. I don't know if he gets to 1,200. He gets to 1,000. That's not a big bar. That's an average of 60 yards a game. That's it. That's not a bad bar. I don't think as of right now, he's a 1,200 yard receiver.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I guess I'll answer it this way. If you're saying buy, keep, sell, Olave, Marvin Harrison, Drake London, I might be buying Drake London after week 2. I'm definitely keeping Olave, but really more importantly, I'm trying to sell Marvin Harrison with the name brand recognition, especially to people who are dynasty folks out there. I'm not selling dynasty shares of Marvin Harrison. I'm saying, you're in leagues with people who love the rookies, right? Are all into the dynasty stuff. It might not be your redraft league, but I'm selling Marvin Harrison to that guy because he's paying the price tag of what Marvin Harrison is in dynasty leagues and why he was drafted top 14 overall in most redraft formats. That's where I can get the best value. Now, the missed open touchdown by Kyler Murray to win the game, that's bad. I mean, that's not a Marvin Harrison thing. He got wide open, but that they didn't involve him is troubling to me. Like, you draft him that high for a reason. He's as highly touted as he is. You can scheme things. And we see that all the time. Like, how about Brian Thomas getting schemed to the extent that he was, I thought looked really good for Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence had confidence right away. Marvin Harrison will produce at the end of the season, but by the time that Marvin Harrison becomes a fantasy relevant receiver for your team, you might be out of fantasy playoff contention. That's kind of where I'm going with this. So
we had a comment in here. I want to add this in as well. Olave doesn't seem like he's ever going to hit a ceiling. What we need to understand about Chris Olave, first of all, last year especially, the offense, he was running all these, we call them go routes. They were just verticals on the sideline. Well, Derek Carr was under pressure. They weren't using play action, so he had no time to get the ball there, and it was often inaccurate because he was under pressure. This offense is completely different. Olave is going to be used much more on in breakers off of play action. That whole offense is predicated around an alpha. So I get it why people would think Olave won't hit his ceiling, but he's finally in an offense that would necessitate that as well.
Totally fair with you. And then I guess I should say totally agree. One of the bigger winners that we're not discussing, I think, enough is George Pickens, who quietly, I think, clearly cleared his ADP, at least from week 1 perspective, and that Justin Fields looks like he's primed for another start week 2. You saw the stat graph where all the throws where Fields was allergic to the middle of the field. Like, Pickens might be great for a slant. We saw that last year. He's able to be explosive, but really Pickens is going to make his bones on the sideline where Fields clearly seems to want to target. So where is Pickens in your rankings then?
I'm a little bit nervous about George Pickens this week. I moved him down to wide receiver 31. It's wide receiver 3 range. And we saw last week. Now, last year's, go back, Patrick Surtain, by the way, is a cornerback he's going to face. Patrick Surtain didn't really shadow last year. He would be on a side. They play zone 73% of the time. So it really didn't, work where Surtain was like shutting anybody down. Last week against DK Metcalf, almost every pass snap that I saw, Surtain was on him. And when you're looking at Pickens, well, you're not worried about Van Jefferson. You're certainly not worried about Calvin Austin. So if they did that last week, Patrick Surtain is going to be lining up on Pickens. Now, if Pickens had a better quarterback, I'd be fine with that. But do you really think Justin Fields, who knows if he makes mistakes, he's not going to be starting as soon as Wilson's healthy? Any mistakes, and that's why he was thrown to the outside last week. The middle of the field, more bodies, more mistakes. But if he has Patrick Surtain, it's going to be a real problem for Fields to want to take the shot into that tight window. And Surtain can actually lock him up for the most part. Now, can Pickens make a big play? Sure, he's George Pickens. But trusting Justin Fields in that scenario, that's why I'm a little bit down on George Pickens this week.
I think that's a great call. I hadn't even thought about that. And the shadowing perspective, I mean, Surtain got paid as one of the best corners in the league, rightfully so. We hadn't seen that. Now that the Broncos are making that adjustment here in year 3 or year 4 from, that's a really good point. Absolutely agree. And then I would imagine for most people, the question come Sunday will be, what do I do with X Packer receiver? We already had one in the comments about Jaden Reed. Romeo Dobbs might be a flex play in certain scenarios. Christian Watson, certainly. Dontavian Wicks was a super high sleeper pick, didn't perform well in week 1. We assume Josh Jacobs and to a lesser extent, Emmanuel Wilson get involved heavily. Is there room to play any of these Packer receivers? Like, how are you sorting this out with Malik Willis likely starting week 2?
This is a real tough call. And you obviously have to downgrade everybody, but here's what I think could happen. I kept Jaden Reed at wide receiver 32. I think he's going to get some handoffs, like underneath, like even pitches. I think they're going to get him some gadgeting up plays, and I think he can make the deal out of that. He can do that. Christian Watson also can be used in a similar way. You can use him on a toss sweep. You can use him on a quick slant. So I have Watson's downgraded to wide receiver 45, but I'm not excited. But it could be a disaster. But you're really hoping that Green Bay can gunk up this offense and trick it up a little bit. Dobbs, wide receiver 50, because he's just an outside X. And I don't think Malik Willis can make those throws. And outside. So I'm very nervous, and I would err on the side of starting a similarly ranked player over a Packer in those scenarios. But I do think Jaden Reed's the one who's most likely to be able to continue producing.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one too. Like they can use Jaden Reed in a bunch of different ways, whereas the other guys maybe not so much. And worth noting, Malik Willis, and I think he started 4 games, maybe even 5 at various points in his career, has yet to throw a touchdown pass in his career. He's got 1 rushing touchdown, yet to throw a passing touchdown. I think that will change. I think that will change at some point in the next 3 weeks. As a Packer fan, I'm hoping that changes, but we'll have to see. Again, against the Colts this week, Titans next week might be the one where revenge game Malik Willis you could be looking at, but I'm not in on any of those guys if I have any other options. Hey, a reminder for everyone, we've launched the new RotoWire Picks app as well. It offers recommendations and picks and predictions for fantasy pick'em and player props on platforms like Prize Picks, BetMGM, Underdog, which we're sponsored for. It's free to download on the Apple and Android app. Sign up within the app for a subscription to unlock all the features. Existing RotoWire.com DFS picks subscribers also get instant full access with their login. Check it out now. Search RotoWire Picks in the App Store. Much to do or much conversation was about the fantasy tight end position being a complete wasteland in week 1. You had Isaiah Likely on Thursday, go nuclear, probably on people's bench for the most part. And then every other player, whether it be Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews or your favorite sleeper like Noah Fant or Tyler Conklin, all stunk. Just awful across the board. What are you doing with this tight end position? Are you overreacting to that? Are you assuming that everyone goes down in your weekly rankings? Like how are we operating with this?
The league plays zone at a 73% rate based on last year. There are going to be opportunities for tight ends. I mean, I could not have foresaw how this shook out for all these tight ends. The big one was the Andrews Likely one. And basically what happened was 3 new offensive linemen. And like I said earlier in the show, they had 2 pass-catching tight ends on the field. And then Kansas City could just go after Lamar Jackson. And they gave him the easy free passes underneath to both Justice Hill and Isaiah Likely. They gave them that. Now, Isaiah Likely made him pay for that, but not to the point where they won because they didn't. And it was almost like a garbage time win, but the Chiefs were in control of that game. The Chiefs got what they wanted. Kansas City really put a lot of bodies and brackets on Mark Andrews. And because of the lack of pass protection, Andrews is a seam stretcher. Well, first of all, it's not going to be like that every week for them. But I have to think they're going to make some adjustments offensively because Lamar Jackson can't be running 16 times a game. He can't live on dump-off passes. Now, this week against the Raiders, they got Max Crosby. That's not exciting. But I do think Mark Andrews is their best receiver on the team. He's way different than Isaiah Likely, who's a catch-and-run guy. Like I said, Andrews is a seam stretcher. The 12-2 on targets, that's not reality. Unless it's like last week where it's all, we give you everything you want underneath. But that most weeks won't happen. So, look, you're still putting Likely down as a top 12 tight end. You're definitely doing it because as long as he's on the field, he's going to see targets. But Mark Andrews is coming back. It might not be this week. This week, Crosby could wreck the game, but it won't be soon after when Mark Andrews is fine.
Yeah, and you could say tight end 12 for Isaiah Likely, which makes sense with David Njoku and Jake Ferguson both likely not playing in the respective games, the Browns and Cowboys. And real quick with Jake Ferguson, I didn't prep you for this one, so it's fair if you don't have an answer. But Luke Schoonmaker, is he worth a pickup at all if Ferguson is eventually ruled out?
He is. He saw some red zone work last year on occasions, taking some looks from Ferguson. Look, Dak Prescott loves throwing to his tight end. That's why I was in on Ferguson last year as early as May, getting him in round 17. And then as the summer went on, it was a little higher of a price. But yeah, it's always going to be the case. Even when Jason Witten couldn't run anymore at the end of his career, Dak Prescott was getting the ball to his tight end. So Luke Schoonmaker is a great streaming option if you need him. They're playing the Saints, and it's not like back in the day where the Saints were lights out against the tight end. I think that the Dallas tight end going to have success here. So if Fergie's out, then I think you could take a look at Schoonmaker again as a streaming option. Don't start him over like, George Kittle or something like that, but certainly put him in the equation in the streaming option.
I'm going to fold 2 questions into one here for you, Jim. Everyone had a popular late round sleeper tight end. You could say Colby Parkinson, which was one of my guys. Noah Fant, I heard often. There was the Jonnu Smith or Tyler Conklin. And I think Luke Musgrave was in that equation. Real quick with Luke Musgrave, pretty easy drop at this point. Tucker Kraft played the majority of the snaps at tight end for the Packers. It's very clear that Tucker Kraft is the tight end when both are healthy. So we'll throw Tucker Kraft into this mix. Colby Parkinson, Noah Fant, Tucker Kraft, Jonnu Smith, Tyler Conklin. Is there any of these low end, tight end 18s and laters that were being drafted that you're now moving up to the point where they're obvious starts for you, or is it still kind of waiting out for all these guys?
I don't think that any are obvious starts, but I am optimistic about Noah Fant. 75% of the snaps, which was really good. 4 targets, didn't do much with them, but it was an ugly game. It was a very ugly game, but the spread offense is going to help, and they are spreading it out, and Fant's going to have room to go. So I am optimistic about him. Colby Parkinson had a great role in the last game, caught 4 or 5 targets, 47 yards, out there all but 12% of the snaps. But I think nonetheless that Colby Parkinson is not quite the athlete that Fant is, and Fant is going to have the ability to make some bigger plays. I have to put Tucker Kraft third because of the short-term quarterback change. Malik Willis, I'm just very concerned. I think they're going to need to block. I think to do anything, Willis is going to need blocking help. And because teams are going to pack everything in because they don't have any reason to fear him throwing downfield. So the bodies that team's going to see up front, it's going to be scary. So in the short term, I can't look at either Packer tight end and be upset. I'd be excited. Now, Jonnu Smith, all the talk in the preseason, weaponizing him, 28% of the snaps. Right. Julian Hill played 59%. Durham Smythe, the blocker, played 42%. If you're not on the field, you're not going to produce.
Yeah, I think Jonnu Smith is a clear drop in a lot of scenarios if you are needing one of those. And Parkinson is my bet. I actually think that without Puka Nakua's on injured reserve, it is going to be, I like Tyler Johnson a lot if you are in deeper leagues. And there's Cooper Kupp who can't continue to get 30 targets a game, but just might have to if the Rams have any aspirations of winning until Nakua is back. So Colby Parkinson is one of my favorites of those out there. That will do it for us on the Wednesday weekly ranking show with Jim here. Real quick, Jim, again, if you are interested in start-sit questions, of course, you can go to @JimCoventryNFL. Jim will answer them at any point. But what time do you have your show for Sunday again?
Yeah, 11 a.m. Eastern. Get a couple hours of fast, furious lineup questions. Love to see you there.
All right, again, thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be back in next week for more weekly rankings.